They say some places are cursed, buildings that should never have been built, floors that should never have been walked upon. Tonight, we take you into the heart of one such nightmare, a place so haunted, so terrifying, that even the bravest security guards refuse to stay past midnight. This isn't just a ghost story. It's a true tale whispered by those who survived. Welcome to 13th Floor Nightmares. The story begins in the city center, where a 20-story office tower stood tall against the skyline. It was just another building by day, filled with the noise of ringing telephones, the shuffle of paperwork, and people rushing to meet deadlines. But by night, it became something else. Strangely, the building never officially had a 13th floor on paper. The elevator skipped from 12 straight to 14. Yet, old staff members swore they'd seen it. A hidden floor, a place that wasn't supposed to exist, but did. It was an unspoken rule: never stay after midnight. Tenants moved in and out, but none lasted long. Some complained of lights flickering, others of sudden cold drafts in the hallways. And then there were those who spoke of something darker, seeing a door where there shouldn't be one, marked with the number 13. One night, a young man named Faisal, a new security guard desperate for work, ignored the warnings. He laughed off the ghost stories. "They're just old wives' tales," he said. But that night, when the clock struck 12, he noticed the elevator behaving strangely. Instead of going from the 12th to the 14th, it stopped. On the 13th, the doors slid open, and Faisal, against his better judgment, stepped inside. The 13th floor was nothing like the rest of the building. It was dimly lit, with walls covered in peeling paint and water stains, as though no one had touched it for decades. The air smelled of mildew, mixed with something metallic, like dried blood. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above, flickering on and off, casting long, distorted shadows. As Faisal walked down the corridor, he felt the weight of silence pressing in. He called out, "Hello? Anybody here?" His voice echoed unnaturally, bouncing back at him like whispers. Then he noticed the doors. Each office door had no numbers, except one at the very end of the hall. Carved into the wood, almost as if scratched by fingernails, was the number 13. Faisal's chest tightened. His hand trembled as he reached for the knob. He told himself it was just a floor under renovation, nothing supernatural. But when he opened the door, the room inside was pitch black. His flashlight flickered, and in that brief glow, he saw something. Rows of empty chairs facing a chalkboard, as though it had once been a classroom. Except the chalkboard still had words written on it in jagged white strokes. "You should not be here." A sudden gust slammed the door shut behind him. Faisal spun around, but the handle wouldn't budge. He was locked in. And then, from the corner of the room, came the faint sound of children giggling. The laughter grew louder, circling him in the darkness. Faisal shone his flashlight, his heart racing. For a moment, the room looked empty. Just dust, broken furniture, and that cursed chalkboard. But then the light caught something. Dozens of tiny handprints smeared across the walls. They weren't old stains. They were fresh. Red. Faisal stumbled back, his breath quickening. The giggling turned into whispers, then into a chorus of voices chanting in unison, "Stay, stay, stay." He aimed his flashlight toward the far corner, and that's when he saw them. Children. Pale, hollow-eyed, their mouths stretched unnaturally wide in eerie smiles. Their clothes were torn, their skin gray as ash. They stood perfectly still, staring at him. And then, in a single synchronized movement, they all tilted their heads to the side. Faisal dropped his flashlight. The room plunged into darkness. He fumbled to pick it up, and when the beam flickered back on, the children were gone. But behind him, breathing heavily against his neck, was something much taller, something not human. He froze, too afraid to turn around. The air grew icy cold, his breath visible in the beam of his flashlight. Slowly, he forced himself to look. And standing right behind him was a faceless figure towering, its head nearly scraping the ceiling, its body thin and unnatural, as if it had been stretched. It leaned closer, whispering in a voice that rattled his bones, "You shouldn't have come here. Faisal stumbled backward, his trembling hand clutching the flashlight. The faceless figure loomed in silence, its body twitching in unnatural jerks, like a puppet with broken strings. Then, without warning, the room plunged into silence. The whispers stopped. The coldness lifted, and the figure vanished. Faisal gasped, backing toward the door. Miraculously, the knob turned this time, and he burst into the hallway, panting, drenched in sweat. He sprinted down the corridor toward the elevator. His finger jabbed the button again and again, begging for it to open. Finally, with a heavy groan, the doors slid open, but inside the panel was wrong. Instead of floors 1 to 20, the buttons were all replaced by a single number, 13. No. No, 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 Faisal muttered, hammering the close button. The doors slammed shut, and the elevator lurched violently, descending. The lights flickered, and he could hear something scratching against the metal walls, as if claws were dragging down the sides. When the doors opened, Faisal's heart stopped. It wasn't the lobby. It was the same cursed corridor of the 13th floor. The elevator had brought him back. By sheer panic, Faisal rammed himself into the stairwell door, forcing it open. He clattered down the steps, desperate to escape. Each flight felt longer than the last, the stairs stretching unnaturally as if he were trapped in an endless loop. At one landing, he finally collapsed, gasping for air. That's when he noticed he wasn't alone. A frail old man wearing a janitor's uniform sat in the corner. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale. He held a mop that dripped with dark water, the stench of rot filling the stairwell. "You shouldn't have taken the elevator," the old man rasped, his voice brittle, cracking like dry wood. Faisal froze. Who are you?" The janitor lifted his head slowly. "I tried to warn them all, but they never listen. The 13th floor keeps what it wants. No one leaves once they've stepped inside." Faisal shook his head violently. "No, I'm leaving. I didn't sign up for this." The janitor let out a dry chuckle. "None of us did." Faisal blinked, and in that instant, the janitor was gone. Only the mop remained, lying in a puddle of black water that seeped across the concrete. Faisal finally stumbled into what looked like a maintenance hallway, desperate for an exit. At the end of it, he found another door. Praying it led outside, he shoved it open. But what lay beyond wasn't the street. It wasn't even a normal room. It was a massive chamber lined with mirrors from floor to ceiling. The reflections stretched infinitely, like an endless maze of glass. His flashlight beam bounced in every direction, disorienting him. Faisal stepped inside cautiously, his reflection staring back 100 times over. At first, they all moved in unison. But then, one of them didn't. He froze, staring at a reflection that lingered a second too long, its head tilting at an odd angle, smiling when he wasn't. Another reflection turned its back to him. Another grinned with sharp teeth. One by one, his reflections began to move on their own, until he was surrounded by versions of himself. Twisted, monstrous, their eyes black, their mouths stretching wider and wider. The air grew heavy. The mirrors began to crack, spider webbing outward, as if something was trying to break through from the other side. Faisal stumbled back, but every direction showed him countless reflections closing in, whispering in his own voice, "You belong here now." And then, with a deafening shatter, the mirrors exploded inward. Faisal darted into the nearest room, slamming the door shut behind him. He braced himself against it, listening as the children clawed at the wood, scratching and pounding. The room was different from the others. It was an abandoned office, dust thick on every surface. A broken desk sat in the middle, and on top of it lay a leather-bound book covered in dried, dark stains. Curiosity and desperation forced him closer. He wiped the dust off the cover. Embossed into the leather were the words, "Tenant Ledger, 13th floor." He opened it, his hands trembling. Inside were names, dozens of them, hundreds, each name written neatly in black ink, until they abruptly ended with a red slash, dripping down the page like blood. And then Faisal saw the last entry. The ink was fresh, still wet. It read, Faisal Ahmed, security guard. His stomach dropped, his vision blurred. He stumbled back from the desk, the book snapping shut on its own with a thunderous clap. Behind him, the door creaked open. The scratching had stopped. The children were silent. But something else, something much worse, had entered. A shadow stretched across the room, long and crooked, even though no light source cast it. It grew taller, darker, until it filled the walls and ceiling. And then the figure stepped through the doorway. It was the same faceless being Faisal had seen before, but clearer now. Its body was impossibly thin, its limbs too long, its fingers like jagged knives scraping against the walls as it moved. The children stood silently behind it, their eyes locked on Faisal, as though presenting him to this thing. The being leaned forward, tilting its blank head. Its voice echoed, not from its mouth, because it had none, but from all around the room, vibrating in Faisal's chest. Every floor needs a keeper, and every nightmare a soul to feed it. You've stepped into ours, and now you belong. The lights flickered violently, the walls groaned, and the ledger on the desk snapped open again. The red ink of his name spread, dripping down the page like veins crawling outward. Faisal's scream tore through the building as the faceless entity reached for him, its long fingers wrapping around his shoulders. And just like that, the 13th floor claimed another. Faisal pressed his hands against the walls of the corridor, desperate to find an escape. But the walls pulsed, almost like they were alive, veins of black mold crawling outward. The whispers started again, dozens of voices, some sounding like children, others like deep guttural moans. They overlapped into a chorus, all saying the same thing: stay with us. The ceiling lights flickered, bursting one by one until only darkness remained. In the glow of his weak flashlight, Faisal saw handprints appearing on the walls, pressing out from the inside, as though countless figures were trapped within, clawing to get out. Suddenly, the floor beneath him shuddered. The corridor stretched unnaturally long, each door warping and twisting, opening to reveal empty black voids. And from those voids, pale arms reached out, grasping, clawing, pulling him toward the darkness. Faisal screamed, fighting against them, but for every hand he broke free, two more grabbed him. His flashlight fell, rolling across the floor, its beam landing on the end of the corridor where one door remained untouched. The door with the number 13. Summoning the last of his strength, Faisal ripped free from the hands and sprinted toward the door. He threw it open and stumbled inside. The room was unlike the others. It was lit by a dull red glow, the walls covered with old photographs. Grainy, black and white images of people staring blankly at the camera. Men, women, children, hundreds of them. Faisal stepped closer, realizing with horror that the faces in the photographs were the same ghostly figures he had seen. The pale children, the faceless man, even the broken-necked figure from the bed. And in the center of the wall was a new photograph, his own face, fresh, recent, staring back at him with lifeless eyes. No, this isn't real, Faisal whispered, stumbling backward. A voice, deep and resonant, filled the room. Every building has its foundations. Ours are made of the forgotten. The 13th floor is where they remain, and now, where you will remain. The walls began to bleed, the photographs warping, mouths opening in silent screams. The floor cracked open beneath him, revealing an endless abyss. Faisal tried to run, but the floor gave way and he fell into the darkness, the voices of the damned echoing around him. The next morning, the office tower bustled as usual. Employees clocked in, elevators hummed. The world moved on as though nothing had happened. But in the security office, a new guard signed his paperwork. His name tag gleamed fresh: Arif. The supervisor, half distracted, handed him the building keys. "Pretty easy job," he said. "Just don't go poking around where you shouldn't." Arif frowned. "What do you mean?" The supervisor smirked faintly, as though recalling an old memory. Nothing. Just, if the elevator ever stops on the 13th floor, don't step out. Trust me." Arif laughed nervously, shaking his head. There's no 13th floor here, right? The supervisor's smile faded. He looked away. That's what we all say. The camera of the mind's eye pans upward, through the glass windows of the tower, higher and higher, until it stops on a single hidden floor with dust-covered windows. And inside, standing motionless in the corridor, flashlight in hand, is Faisal. His eyes are hollow, his expression blank, waiting. Some buildings carry more than bricks and concrete. They carry secrets. They carry the souls of those who never made it out. The next time you find yourself in an old high-rise, take a look at the elevator buttons. If you see the number 13, don't press it, because if you do, you may never leave. This was 13th Floor Nightmares, True Ghost Tales. Sweet dreams if you can sleep tonight.